It has been a good few months for Molly. For a woman in the early 1900s, she had a well-paying job at only 24, and people often complimented her on being glowingly beautiful, whatever that meant. The only problem is she has a toothache. No big deal. Nothing. Nothing a little trip to the dentist can solve. That's what she thought. Because little did she know, the toothache was a precursor for something horrific, because only 8 months later, Molly was dead. In this video, we'll talk about one of the most horrendous cases in American history and the women involved in it. In 1898, Marie Curie and his husband Pierre discovered radium. Marie was amazed at how it glowed, and she conducted studies to understand it more. In 1936, her book Radioactivity was published, only a year after she had died. Over the years, radium would be seen as a miracle element, especially when it was discovered that it cured some kinds of skin cancer and eradicated underlying tumors. Not long after, many fields and businesses wanted to get their hands on radium. They incorporated it in cosmetics, dairy products, toothpaste, and water. Some companies even sold radium-infused medicines that claimed to cure all kinds of ailments. But besides its effects on the body, radium also had aesthetic appeal. It glowed so beautifully that it almost looked like magic. This is where Dr. Sabine Arnold von Schocke would enter the picture. Dr. Schocke devised a formula to incorporate radium's glowing feature into the paint. Thus, luminescent paint was invented. It was used on many things: signs, theater seat numbers, keyhole locators, and more. In 1914, the United States Radium Corporation was founded in New York City. Luminescent paint was in demand, as there was a war in Europe then, and it was used to paint the numbers in wristwatches. This would make the soldiers' wristwatches readable at night. Soon after, the Radium Dial Company was founded in Ottawa, Illinois. They produced watch dials with luminescent paint and hired only young women for this job. Some believe they did this since it would require small, delicate hands to paint the dials. The women would paint about 4,300 dials a day, using lip pointing. To paint the small numbers in the dial watches, the women's brush needed to be pointed. Thus, after they soaked their bristles with radium, they would twirl it between their lips. At that time, being a dial painter was the elite job for poor working girls. Some people were called the ghost girls, as they would have radium all over their clothes and other parts of their bodies, which made them glow. As incredible as radium seemed at that time, it already had a victim, and it was none other than the person who discovered it. During her studies on radium, Marie Curie exposed herself to vast amounts of radiation. Without gloves, she would carry test tubes with radioactive isotopes in her pockets and all kinds of radioactive materials. Her hands were burned, and in her last years, she was almost blind. Eventually, she did. Thus, it was only a matter of time before radium would manifest its horrible effects on the Radium Girls. And then, it came. This is where the woman at the beginning of our story would enter the picture. In January 1922, Molly Maggia, a 24-year-old dial painter, went to her dentist after suffering from a bad toothache. The dentist extracted the tooth, but Molly's troubles didn't stop. More teeth started hurting, and the dentist had to remove them, one after another. To make things worse, ulcers sprouted from her mouth and came with blood and pus. This made her breath smell foul. In the following weeks, Molly also felt aching pains in her limbs. It was so unbearable that she eventually couldn't walk anymore. Her face was swollen, and she had large abscesses in her ears and lower jaw. But what happened next was unimaginable. When the doctor gently touched her jaw, it broke and crumbled. Days later, Molly was left without a lower jaw on her face, and in September 1922, she finally passed away, with the doctor marking the cause of death as syphilis. She was only the first. Not long after, many of her co-workers started to feel the same symptoms, aching pains and losing teeth, and soon later, many followed Molly to the grave. The girls started to suspect the deaths were related to their jobs, but every time they asked the company if what they were doing was safe, they would always answer a resounding yes. But eventually, the USRC sent doctors to investigate the matter. They postulated that it is possible that the radium the girls are exposed to every day could be the reason behind it. Unfortunately, At that time, there was no means of measuring the radiation levels of human beings. If the girls were to fight back against the company, they would need some evidence. In 1925, a brilliant doctor named Harrison Markland came up with a test that could measure the radiation levels of a living human. This was the break that the girls needed, and they immediately asked for Dr. Markland's help. And when they did, it was confirmed. A lot of the dial painters had radium in their systems. The companies did not like the result, trying to bury the information and not letting the public know about their negligence. They even tried to discredit Dr. Markland's test, which wasn't reliable and wrong. But they had no escape. A group of former dial painters led by Grace Fryer decided to fight the company and hold them accountable for their lies. They also wanted to raise awareness about the dangers of working with radium to protect their former colleagues and the general public. To strengthen their argument, they exhumed the body of Molly Maggia. When they saw the skeleton, it did not disappoint. Molly's remains were glowing, proving that radium was present in her body. The company did everything it could to prevent a lawsuit. They bribed doctors to give the employees clean health bills. They harassed the families of dial painters who asked questions about the safety of radium. But it was too late. The girls were determined and they went to court. The trial began in 1928. It became a media sensation, and as the press zoomed in on the case, one of the women's most substantial pieces of evidence was an encounter that Grace Fryer remembered when she was still a dial painter. She recounts how a doctor who saw her place the radium in her lips froze in horror and told her never to do that. The doctor was none other than Dr. Sachaki, the inventor of the luminescent paint. Unfortunately, the doctor denied this in his testimony and claimed he had no control over how the girls used radium. This was a massive blow to the women's case, and they were forced to agree to a settlement with the USRC. The company would pay their medical bills, and they would be given some money and allowance. Eventually, Grace Fryer died from radium poisoning, as she was already in bad condition during the trial, and 4 years after the settlement, the company stopped paying most women's medical bills. All seemed bleak, until a group of women from Illinois fought against the radium company after being inspired by Grace and her allies. In 1938, a former dial painter named Catherine Wolfe testified against their firm on her deathbed. At the time, she had already lost most of her teeth and a part of her jaw and could barely stand up, but her testimony was so strong that her group won the case. She did what Grace Fryer and her allies set out to do, and this victory was theirs too. The Radium girls endured unspeakable horrors, deformities, aching pains, contracting cancer, and many more. But something positive did come out of it, because thanks to their case, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration was established in the US. It was formed to protect workers from abusive employers. Before this, almost 14,000 people died on the job every year. Today, it's just over 4,500, a vast improvement. That is the legacy of some of the bravest and most determined women to walk the earth, the Radium Girls.